Revelation 645. From the 29th and the 30th of October 1938. Earthly and spiritual activity. Faith. Love. Every being that comes into contact with the earth has to carry out a visible earthly purpose and at the same time an activity corresponding to the spiritual sense, which is only understandable when the whole earthly life is properly considered. In certain time intervals, the being separates from its respective form. It has fulfilled its task in it, was earthly active, by enlivening God's work of creation, and has also used in this form the spiritual maturing time assigned to it by God, so that again a new form can take up the being for further development. However, the more mature and extensive the outer form becomes, the greater the resistance that the spiritual being has to overcome. Every being in the divine creation can reach the state of maturity only through resistance, because by overcoming this resistance, it strives upward, and this alone is evaluated by the eternal Creator. It cannot, as it were, test its strength without resistance, therefore it cannot give proof of inner strength and power. If the being now approaches its perfection, which only then makes the embodiment as a human being possible for it, then also the urge for earthly activity will increase accordingly, and therefore the souls will have the endeavor to be worthy of a great task in order to be able to increase their own progress by this. The soul recognizes before its embodiment as man very well the situation in which it is, and has no other aim than to have the time of its walk on earth soon behind itself, and would like to be active therefore in every form only always to be able to improve as soon as possible the most painful, which measurelessly oppresses the earthly state. And yet countless opportunities are missed which could relieve the soul's suffering. The struggle for the last promotion is often abandoned without resistance. It is not worked for the good of itself on earth, but in weakness of faith the soul is held back from its real activity. The 30th of October 1938, this is a process which will be explainable to all if you only consider that in no way a forward development can take place if the being in matter is always in the same state. But that this state experiences no change if the divine power cannot work. But this only then expresses itself if the preconditions have been fulfilled, which again consist in, first of all, firm belief in a divine power, and out of this belief, obedience to the demand made by the divine power. The spirit being before the embodiment as a human being meets all these requirements of God, because it must carry out the will of God, therefore fulfills its activity, which is intended for it in every form. But as a human being, it is equipped completely differently with the gift of reason, the understanding, and with free will. Thus man can examine everything and accept or reject it. And since a spark of divine knowledge is put into his heart, he can now think for himself and put himself into the state of inner faith, and only then the ascent begins. But without faith man also walks his earthly way in an unchanged spiritual state and does not fulfill the task given to him on earth. Now the time passes unused, which the being has striven for before, knowing that only this embodiment as man can bring him liberation from matter. All demands which earthly life makes on man are fulfilled to the best of his ability, and the only most important one, the higher development of the soul, is disregarded. And nevertheless the being must go this earthly way without knowledge about the actual purpose. It must acquire this knowledge itself alone, since it has also received the ability for it. It must find its way to the highest Godhead of its own accord and bear desire for it, because only in this way the complete return into the Father's house can happen. A coerced being would never be able to form itself like God, and would also not remain in a permanent connection with the Heavenly Father, because it would not yet have completely detached itself from its desires. It must conquer these fully believing and out of free will, and thus pave the way to the height. And now it is also understandable why the spiritual life of the individual is completely independent of the earthly activity. The spirit is free and unbound and takes up residence where it pleases. Only in this very activity and its consequences for the earthly life, the mind and the thinking are often stimulated in such a way that an explanation is sought and found, in which connection the spiritual activity stands with the earthly. Then faith will begin, and with it, the redemption of the soul from matter begins. Because the right faith produces the love to God and to the neighbor, and love again is the only possibility to redeem oneself. Love has a beneficial effect in every respect. It puts man in the state of knowledge. It ennobles him and pulls everything spiritual in man up to the heights. Love brings about the final union with the Heavenly Father, who is love himself. Amen.